Time now for a check of the top business news stories. I'm joined by our business editor, Kate Moody. Hi there, Kate.
Hi, Tom.
We've talked a lot about the impact of the coronavirus on economies all around the world, including here in France. But let's have a look and see what the impact has been on Africa.
Yeah, and in particular, we're going to focus on the aid that businesses and families need as the pandemic continues to spread. While the globe has just passed the 1 million fatality mark, the African continent has seen just under 36,000 deaths officially linked to COVID-19. About 1.4 million cases have been diagnosed in African countries. The pandemic is pushing the region into its first recession in a quarter of a century, with GDP forecast to shrink up to 5%. Some 89% of the labor market is informal, and 90% of companies are classified as small or medium enterprises. All that makes surviving and thriving the pandemic a formidable challenge. Now we're joined by Sergio Pimenta, Vice President for the Middle East and Africa of the International Finance Corporation, a member of the World Bank Group, which supports the development of the private sector around the world. Thanks so much for joining us this evening on France 24. If you will, give us an overview of how deep and how lasting you expect the coronavirus recession across Africa to be.
Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, the impact of COVID-19 in Africa is going to be not only on the health side as the impact of the pandemic, but also on the economic side. And when we look at the forecast for 2020, it is forecast that this year, Africa as a continent will go back into recession, which is something that hasn't happened in over 25 years. So the impact will be long-lasting and will be difficult. And this is why we need to really support Africa and come up with solutions to help people in the continent weather this crisis and find better livelihoods and ways of recovering from what's happening.
Well, tell us about some of those solutions. The World Bank itself is deploying some $50 billion to support African economies through the pandemic. What kind of extra support has the IFC announced?
So IFC is a private sector arm of the World Bank Group. We are focusing on supporting private sector companies in the continent, and we are deploying large financial tools to support these companies in Africa. We have announced and started deploying an $8 billion facility, a global facility that is to help companies face the immediate needs that they have in this pandemic times. And in Africa, we've deployed $1.5 billion out of this facility. For instance, we've provided funding for some banks to on-lend to SMEs. As you know, SMEs are really impacted by the crisis, and they are the ones, particularly in Africa, that create employment. So we need to help them maintain that employment.
Conversely, then, what kind of role is the private sector in Africa playing in trying to combat the virus?
So in Africa, like around the world, private sector has a significant role to play in helping the economies recover after COVID and responding to what's happening. In Africa in particular, you have to look at the opportunities that there are in terms of developing new markets, new ideas, and roll them out across the continent. I would, for instance, mention what can be done on the digital space, where Africa still has quite a bit to catch up, where you see a lot of companies really coming up with bright ideas and rolling them out and helping find solutions that are specifically tailored for Africa and for the African markets. Private sector plays a key role there, in particular when you look at the situation, the macro situation of the countries, where indebtedness entering into this crisis was already high. So when countries are already quite deep in debt, you do need the funding from the private sector to come and complement what governments can do and to really bring solutions to help people find new livelihoods, new jobs, and really a new recovery to their lives.
Can you give us a concrete example of what sectors you think really need the most help here?
Absolutely. There's quite a few sectors that need help. I mean, what we have started doing is having targeted instruments that are going to help these sectors. The one obviously that comes to mind in health sector. For instance, we have just announced a global facility on the health side at the IFC so that we can help companies there. In the MENA and Africa region in specific, we have deployed a few $100 million to help hospitals build, adjust, adapt to the situation. So that's one of the sectors that we're doing a lot. Other sectors that are impacted are sectors linked to commodities, such as agriculture, agribusiness. As you know, the global supply chains are being impacted by the crisis, and Africa can feel a little bit disconnected from some of its markets. So we are helping on this sector. Other key sectors, and I could go on for a long time, you can talk about tourism. This is a very important sector in terms of employment, also logistics. You can talk about transportation. I mean, transportation Africa is suffering. So all these sectors we're developing at the IFC, we are developing appropriate solutions to help the continent really recover from the crisis.
All right, Sergio Pimenta of the International Finance Corporation. Thanks so much for joining us on France 24 this evening. We've just got time to check in on the day's trading action. Now, the major European indices closed lower. We saw losses of about 0.5 percentage point across the board. Shares of the French utility Suez have risen nearly 6% after Veolia raised its bid for a stake in its water management business from 2.9 to 3.4 billion euros. Wall Street is trending higher as well. Hopes that the U.S. Congress might reach agreement on another stimulus package after some positive statements from the U.S. Treasury Secretary. You can see the NASDAQ up about 0.75 percentage point this hour. Stocks are still, though, on track for their first month of losses since March. And I'll have the closing word from Wall Street in just under an hour's time, Tom.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that update. Kate Moody there, our business editor.